I was 16 when we moved to Briar Hollow, a village so small it felt like the kind of place you'd only notice if you were already lost. On a map, it was nothing more than a dot in the Piedmont woods of North Carolina. Narrow roads curling through silence, miles of trees pressing in from every direction. My mom called it a fresh start. The truth was, after the divorce, life had turned into shouting matches, unopened bills, and nights where I wished I could just vanish. She wanted quiet. I wanted to stop existing. Briar Hollow didn't even have its own high school. Every morning I sat through a 40-minute bus ride to Averton, the next town over. The ride was long and rattling, a purgatory where every other kid seemed to know each other's secrets from birth. I was the outsider no one sat next to unless every other seat was taken. But eventually I found two people who made the days less heavy, Clara and Reese Morgan. They lived closer to Averton, but their grandparents owned land near Briar Hollow, so they were always around. Reese had been adopted when they were little, but they and Clara ended up in the same grade. The first time I met them, Clara was by the lake near the fire station, flicking rocks across the water, while Reese was halfway up the rusted windmill behind it, daring gravity to give way. I'd been walking by myself until Clara called out, asking if I wanted to try skipping rocks. That small invitation changed everything. From then on, we stuck together. The cafeteria loners at the edge of the room, earbuds shared on the bus, weekends swallowed by trails no one bothered to name. I carried a quiet crush on Clara that clung to me like a secret weight. The kind you never confess because it's easier to suffer silently than risk breaking the only good thing you've got. I'm pretty sure she knew, but she never teased me for it, and I never tested the balance. The day everything shifted was late September, a Saturday. The air smelled of damp leaves and pine sharp enough to sting your nose. They met me outside my place at 10, all of us with backpacks stuffed with water, snacks, and whatever junk felt necessary for a day of wandering. "So, where are we headed this time?" Clara asked, pushing a loose strand of hair back, her brother's hoodie swallowing her frame, cargo pants sagging at the knees. "Back behind Harper's Trail," I said. "Found a side path last week when I was walking Molly. Cuts left past the ridge." Reese squinted at me. "That's where the ground dips into the ravine, right? You sure we're not about to get lost out there?" "We've got Google Maps," I said, patting my phone like it was a compass. "Plus 3 sandwiches, 2 granola bars, and a bag of sour gummies. We'll survive," Clara smirked. "If we die, I'm haunting you first." The 3 of us set out, 30 minutes on foot until the familiar trailhead appeared. The main path was predictable, worn dirt, moss patches, boot prints, but halfway down I led them onto the side path. It tightened almost immediately, trees crowding closer until it felt like the forest was folding itself shut around us. "This looks cozy," Reese muttered. "Don't be such a chicken," Clara teased, tossing them a grin. The woods in Briar Hollow weren't like Averton's. They were denser, older, the kind of quiet that pressed against your ribs. Sometimes it felt like the trees were paying attention, holding their breath when you passed. I know how that sounds, but when you grow up in silence, you learn to notice the difference between stillness and listening. We followed the narrowing trail until it emptied into a creek, shallow and glassy, curling around rocks like it was tracing some forgotten line on a map. "Let's follow it," Clara said, her eyes bright. "It has to lead somewhere." "Somewhere like a dead raccoon," Reese muttered, though they followed anyway. For nearly an hour we walked, and the deeper we went, the more the forest changed. Birdsong vanished, the breeze stilled. Even our footsteps seemed muffled, like the air was swallowing sound. And then we saw it. Through the tangle of trees, a shape emerged. Slate roof, moss clinging to its bones. Clara froze. "Is that a house?" "No way," I said, my chest tight. "There's nothing out here." "No one lives this deep in." Reese shifted uneasily. "We should turn back, seriously." "You can wait here if you want," Clara said. "We'll check it out real quick. I'm not standing here alone." "Are you kidding me?" So we went together. No trail led to it. It just sat there, as if it had been dropped out of the sky and forgotten, the forest knitting itself closed around it. The house leaned into itself, sagging, rotting like it had been waiting for us all along. Siding peeled away like old skin, and most of the windows were either broken or smeared with mold. The front door hung crooked, open just enough to invite trouble, and the sight of it made my stomach turn. "You guys feel that?" I asked, voice small. Clara nodded without looking away. "Yeah, it feels heavy." "Ree?" I prompted. Reese's voice came out thin. "We should go." But Clara had already stepped onto the porch. The board sighed under her weight, a long, tired sound. "Just 5 minutes," she said, and I followed because she always moved first. Of course I did, I muttered to myself. Inside, the smell hit like a fist. Rot and mildew and some sour, metallic tang that made the back of my throat tighten. The walls were streaked yellow where water had run down in slow, patient layers. Trash and splintered furniture were scattered like evidence of a life abandoned mid-breath. "Someone's been here," Clara said, voice flat, pointing at an empty can of beans on the floor. We tiptoed through the living room and into the kitchen. Once a place for meals, it looked like it had been frozen and left to rot. A kettle sat crazed with rust. A drawer hung open, its contents spilled and faded. The whole house had that peculiar hush of neglect, the kind that presses on your ears and makes you small. Then, footsteps upstairs. Slow, sure, deliberate, like someone walking with a reason. All three of us stopped. My legs felt like they belonged to someone else. I looked at Clara. Her face was white enough that the freckles on her nose looked painted on. She mouthed, "Go." Before we could move, a figure pooled at the top of the stairs, like shadow-given bone. He was old and wrong in ways you could feel. Gaunt, clothes hanging off him like ill-fitting memories, hair wild and matted, eyes sunk into a face that had forgotten sleep. He shouted, "Get out!" His voice was dry as dirt. It hadn't been used in years, and then suddenly there it was, cracking the silence so hard I thought my chest would break. We screamed. We ran. Clara was ahead, barefooting it toward the door, and I heard Reese stumble somewhere behind. At the doorway, something grabbed my arm, a clamp of fingers like iron. "No!" I yelled, twisting. "Isaac!" Clara spun back and latched onto my other arm, pulling. Reese joined, hands frantic. The man's nails bit into my skin. Pain bloomed white-hot, but I wrenched free. We tore out of that house like our bodies remembered how to move before our minds could catch up, crashing through trees and branches that sliced at our faces and arms. I didn't look back until we'd gone far enough for the trees to close behind us. When we finally stopped, gasping and covered in scratches, Clara's lip trembled. "He had a knife," she said, as if the words were a new horror she'd discovered. "I didn't see it," I whispered. "I did," Reese answered hoarsely. We walked until the creek came into view, and the ordinary sound of water made something inside me loosen. Reese was shaking so hard I could hear it in their shoulders. I couldn't stop looking over my shoulder, expecting to see a dark shape between the trunks. We didn't talk much on the walk back. At home, my mother was furious, a bright flare of fear and anger. When I told her, she called the sheriff. 2 deputies came the next day, polite and businesslike. A week later, one of them called to say they'd found the house empty. The door had been nailed shut when they arrived. Inside, there were signs someone had been living there. A mattress, food wrappers, feces in a corner. No sign of the man we'd seen. Probably a drifter, the deputy said. But the face I could still see in my head wasn't a drifter's face. It had a kind of fuel in it. Rage and something old and patient. It didn't fit the word drifter. Years moved forward like a slow train. Clara left for college. Reese moved to Charlotte. I stayed to help my mom when she got sick. We rarely spoke of that day. The memory felt like a bruise we pretended wasn't there. One summer, when we were all back for Clara's grandfather's funeral, we decided to check the site again. "I need to know it was real," Clara said. This time we took my truck and a maintenance road marked on an old survey map instead of hacking through the woods. When we pulled up, our mouths went dry. The house was gone. Where it had stood was an overgrown lot, fenced with tall wire. No foundation, no construction, just weeds and dirt. Someone had spray-painted a warning on a fence post, "Do not return." Clara turned to me, voice small. "He's gone, right?" I nodded, because what else could I do? He had to be gone. But the certainty didn't live in me. Now sometimes when I drive past the tree line behind Harper's Trail at night, that same heaviness sits on my chest. The silence of those trees isn't empty. It remembers. And I do too. I was 15 the spring it happened, living in the kind of town where you swore nothing ever did. That's not me being dramatic, it was the truth. Gallows Hill, Nebraska, population 872 last time I checked, and that was in '98. Could be less now. It was the sort of place where people still left their doors unlocked, where the church bulletin got passed around like it was breaking news. One main road split the town right down the middle. A gas station, 2 diners, and a grocery store that hadn't moved a shelf since before I was born. That was it. Entertainment, forget it. No movie theater, no arcade, not even a mall within 40 miles. We didn't have cable until I turned 10. Internet showed up later, but we couldn't afford it anyway. Being an only child, I depended on my friends for fun whenever I could find them. Luckily, I had 2 good ones, Leo Madsen and Tara Doyle. Same grade, same stretch of Burwood Avenue, which wound just outside the town's tiny center. Leo and I were basically brothers. His mom ran the daycare, so we'd known each other since diapers. Tara came in later, 8th grade, all sharp edges and sarcasm after moving from Iowa. She didn't care that most girls side-eyed her. She clicked with us instantly. Weekends meant hiking the trails behind Leo's house, cutting across woods, wandering grasslands that stretched on forever. We liked the outdoors. Hell, we had no choice. Early April, still chilly mornings, but warm enough for hoodies. I remember the date exactly, April 11th, 1998, Saturday. My dad had gone into town for truck parts. Mom was tied up on the phone with my aunt. Leo showed up on my porch around 9. Beanie pulled low, wearing his older brother's Letterman jacket. "You ready?" he asked like he even needed to. "Yeah, give me a sec," I said, slinging a football, pocket knife, and water bottle into my backpack. We never planned much. Just headed out, let the day figure itself. We swung by Tara's place. She was already on her porch, arms crossed, combat boots on, hoodie sleeves shoved up. "Finally," she muttered, grabbing her bag and falling in with us. We took the usual trail behind Leo's. The ground was soft from last week's rain, but not muddy. After 40 minutes, the trees gave way to a wide sea of grass, tall stalks swaying gold in the breeze. Normally, we stuck to familiar paths, but Leo spotted something different, an open patch near a clump of trees. "Let's check it out," he said. We pushed through the grass until we reached a clearing big enough to toss the football. Dropped our bags, started messing around. Nothing serious, just spirals and long runs. Tara always had the best throw. We were mid-game when Leo launched one too hard. The ball sailed over my head, disappearing into the tall grass. "Nice one, Joe Montana," I muttered, jogging after it. I shoved through the blades, eyes scanning. That's when I saw it. Dull red metal peeking through the grass line. At first I thought tractor, maybe a tank, but the shape was wrong. I stepped closer. It was a station wagon, half buried under dry grass and leaves. The paint had faded to a dusty red, fake wood paneling peeling along the sides. Retro even for 98, the windshield spider cracked, vines curling around the mirrors. "Hey," I called. "Come here." Leo and Tara jogged over, stopped dead. "Whoa," Leo whispered.
"How the hell did that get out here?"
Tara circled it slow. "No way. There's no road, no tracks. This thing didn't just drive in." "Think it's locked?" I asked. I grabbed the passenger handle, tugged. At first it stuck, then creaked open with a groan. Dust floated up in the sunlight. "No way." Leo grinned. Tara shrugged. "Better seats than the grass." She slid into the driver's side. Leo climbed into the back. I dropped into the passenger seat, staring at the dash. Dusty, yeah, but still intact. Fuzzy dice dangled from the rear view, swaying gently. We stayed in there for almost an hour, talking, laughing, inventing stories about how it ended up here. Leo swore it was a heist car. Tara said it was a makeout spot someone forgot. I didn't have a theory, just sat there unsettled, watching the way the light cut across the cracked windshield. When the wind picked up and our stomachs started growling, we finally decided to head back. "Let's not tell anyone," Tara said, her voice low but steady. "This can be our secret spot." We all nodded. It felt good, dangerous in a way, like we'd discovered something that belonged only to us. The next morning, the sky cracked open with rain. Leo still showed up at my door grinning, jacket already damp. We decided to go anyway. Tara was waiting at the edge of the woods, soaked through, her hair plastered to her cheeks. "Still want to do this?" she asked, squinting at us. "Why not?" Leo shot back. "We're almost there." We sprinted through the trees, slipping on wet leaves, laughing at ourselves like idiots. By the time we reached the clearing, the rain was coming down hard. We dove into the car, dripping, water pooling on the seats. I slid into the back this time. Leo claimed the driver's seat, Tara the passenger. For a while, we just sat, listening to the steady drumming on the roof. The sound was weirdly calming, like being wrapped in a blanket. I stretched my legs, letting them slide under the seat. That's when my foot hit something soft. At first I thought it was just trash. I leaned down, brushed aside a greasy fast food wrapper, and froze. A clump of hair. Brown, matted. Too fine to be animal. Too human. My chest tightened. My hand shook as I ran my fingers along the edge of the back seat and found something else. A slit in the fabric, straight, deliberate, like it had been cut with a knife. The stitching over it was sloppy, as if someone had tried to hide it. I tapped Leo's shoulder. My voice came out small. "Hey, we need to go." He laughed, not even turning around. "What, you scared of a little rain?" Tara glanced back, frowning. "Why, just outside," I said. "Please." They hesitated, but finally followed me out. We stood under the trees, rain soaking us to the bone. "There's hair under the seat," I whispered, "and the fabric's cut like someone stuffed something in there." My throat was tight. "I think this car was part of something bad." Tara's face drained of color. Leo's grin fell flat. "You sure?" he asked quietly. "Pretty sure." We started back in silence. Rain plastered our clothes, our sneakers squelching with every step. By the time we stumbled into town, the storm had broken, sunlight dripping through the clouds like nothing had happened. "I'll tell my parents," I said. "You guys don't have to." I went straight to my dad. Told him everything, well, almost everything. I didn't mention that we'd found it the day before. I didn't want the lecture. He just raised an eyebrow, nodded once, and said, "I'll call the sheriff. Probably just an old abandoned car, but we'll let them check it out." That afternoon, Sheriff Howard came by. He asked me to show him where it was. I gave him rough directions, trying not to sound nervous. He thanked me, promised they'd send someone. That night, I was at Leo's basement playing cards with him and Tara when his mom came down the stairs. "The sheriff's here," she said. We exchanged looks. Upstairs, Sheriff Howard stood in the doorway, rain still clinging to his boots, his expression hard. "They found something," he said. "Not just the car, a body. Or what's left of one." My stomach flipped. My hands shook. Tara sank onto the couch like her legs had given out. Leo just stood there, silent, eyes wide. "We'll need you kids to come down to the station tomorrow," the sheriff added. "Go over everything again." We nodded, unable to speak. Our parents picked us up soon after. That night I lay in bed, wide awake, listening to the house creak, trying not to imagine the body under the seat. For weeks, the whole town buzzed. Rumors everywhere. Parents kept kids home, woods off limits. It felt like Gallows Hill had a shadow hanging over it. Eventually, word spread. The car was registered to a man from Colorado, reported missing in '95. His family had been searching ever since. Dental records confirmed it was him. Cause of death, blunt force trauma. They found his wallet and ID buried under the driver's seat. Whoever killed him hadn't tried too hard to cover it up. But the case went cold anyway. No DNA, no fingerprints, no weapon. Just a station wagon hidden in the grass for 3 years. We talked to the police 2 more times. They never looked at us as suspects. Just unlucky kids who stumbled across something rotten. The following year, Tara moved away. Missouri, her dad's new job. We wrote letters, called sometimes, but life drifted us apart. Leo stayed. He runs the hardware store now. Sometimes we grab coffee, and without fail, the conversation circles back to the car. "We shouldn't have gone back that second day," he told me once. We got lucky, he was right. That car had been waiting there all along, tucked in the grasslands. And I still wonder about the person who left it, how close they lived, how often they walked past us in town, and how they walked away without ever getting caught. It started on an idle Tuesday, the kind that slides past unnoticed, leaving you to wonder later if it ever really existed. For me, though, that Tuesday was far from ordinary. I was 22, still living in Ridge Hollow, a small, tight-knit town in upstate New York. Not the kind of picturesque village you see on postcards. The town where the gas station doubles as a corner grocery, where neighbors watch your every move from their porches, and slowing down to tie your shoe can earn you a suspicious glance. I was still living at home, which meant my routines were predictable, almost painfully so. My older brother Ryan had just gotten his first car, a battered '99 Civic with a loud muffler and a passenger door that refused to close properly. Ryan worked construction jobs a county over, and occasionally I'd tag along, either for the ride or to escape the stifling familiarity of home. That late summer afternoon was no different. The air clung to my skin, humid and heavy, carrying the faint scent of rain that had yet to fall. Ryan needed gas, and we had just driven through Oakridge, a part of town most locals avoided if they could. Not dangerous exactly, but its reputation was enough. Loitering teens, men who lingered too long in the same parked cars, a quiet menace that hovered in the air. My mom had always called it the corner where you mind your business. By 5 p.m., we pulled into a run-down gas station perched on the edge of Oakridge. Rusted pumps lined the cracked concrete and the paint on the building peeled like old scabs. "I'm going in to pay," Ryan said, jerking the stick shift into park. "You want anything?" I shook my head. "Nah, I'm good. Gonna have a smoke." He nodded and disappeared into the dimly lit interior. I lit a cigarette, leaning against the car, my eyes scanning the lot out of habit more than curiosity. Ryan had been obsessively locking the car ever since someone smashed his window the previous year, and today was no exception. I didn't think much of it. Locking doors was normal, routine. The sky had started to darken, gray creeping across the edges of the sun, like a sheet being drawn over a fading day. There were 4 pumps and only one other car occupied the lot, a dusty green sedan parked across from us. The driver, a man in his 40s, had one foot propped on the inside sill of his door, fiddling with something inside. I barely noticed him at first. Then he got out and crossed the narrow gap between our cars. "Excuse me," he said, stopping a few feet away. I felt a flicker of unease. He wore plain, loose jeans, a white t-shirt, scuffed sneakers, nothing remarkable. And yet there was something off. Not hostile, not friendly, just a detached, unnerving calm in his eyes, yeah? I muttered, flicking ash to the pavement. "Think you could help me with something real quick?" he asked. "Nothing big. Just need you to put your foot on the gas for a second. Something's acting weird, and I want to check if it's the pedal or the line." My stomach sank. Cigarette in hand, I shuffled back toward the car. I don't think so," I said, forcing a nervous laugh. "I'm not really comfortable with that." He lifted his hands, casual, non-threatening. "Okay, no worries. Just asking," but he didn't move away. He lingered, eyes fixed on me like he was silently hoping I'd change my mind. My pulse quickened. I yanked at the car door, forgetting it was locked. It rattled uselessly in my hand. Ryan was still inside the station, and the reflection off the glass kept him invisible. That's when the second man appeared on the other side of the lot. Taller, broader, wearing a faded baseball cap, his steps purposeful. "You need help?" he called out, voice loud but casual. "Yeah, I was just asking her," the first man said, nodding toward me. "But she's not comfortable." "You mind?" "Sure." The second man shrugged, and I watched frozen as he climbed into the green sedan, settling into the driver's seat. He scanned the interior, then said, "There's nothing wrong with your car, man. Everything feels normal." My heart thudded in my chest, each beat loud in the oppressive quiet. I could feel the tension coiling in the pit of my stomach, the smell of gasoline and hot asphalt mixing with the metallic tang of fear. This was Oakridge, and I was suddenly aware that the ordinary rhythms of my day had twisted into something entirely different. Something that might not let me leave as easily as I'd hoped. The first guy let out a small, almost embarrassed laugh. "Huh? Must have fixed itself then," he said, shrugging like nothing had happened. It was such a bizarre exchange. Too bizarre, and then it hit me, the chilling thought crawling into the pit of my stomach. They were testing me, seeing who'd take the bait, who'd follow them into a car, who was too polite, too conditioned to say no. I wanted to scream for Ryan. I wanted to run inside the station, grab him, drag him out into the open, but my legs refused to obey. It was like I was rooted to the cracked asphalt, watching a horror movie unfold in real time, only this wasn't fiction. I was part of it. Then just like that, the second man climbed out of the sedan, gave a casual nod, and walked off toward the back of the building as if he'd never been involved. The first man lingered a heartbeat longer, his eyes meeting mine for a final, unsettling glance before he slipped back into his car. I didn't exhale until Ryan finally emerged from the station, holding a soda and a crumpled plastic bag. The instant I saw him, the tension snapped, and I rushed to him, words tumbling out in a panicked rush. "Ryan," he asked me. He wanted me to get in the car and press the gas. And then, another guy just did it. My voice cracked. Ryan's eyes narrowed, scanning the lot, but the green sedan was already sliding away, tires squealing softly against the asphalt. "You didn't get in, right?" he asked. "No," I whispered, still trembling. Good. Smart, he muttered, shaking his head. You were about to get snatched. What? I choked, my mind struggling to process. That's how they do it. Seen it on the news. They ask for something stupid, something harmless. And when you're inside, that's it. Door shuts. Car drives off. Doesn't matter who's around. No one jumps in. But there were people, I said, disbelief clawing at me. Someone could have seen. Someone would have helped. Ryan shook his head slowly. Not here. People barely make eye contact, let alone play hero. We didn't call the police. Nothing had actually happened. That was the worst part. The terrifying nearness of it and yet the absence of evidence. We went home. I didn't sleep that night, and for days afterward the scene played over and over in my mind. What if I'd said yes? What if the second guy hadn't shown up? What if it had just been me and the first man alone? What if the door hadn't been locked? After that, I carried pepper spray everywhere. Ryan got me one of those mini alarms, the ones that scream if you pull the pin. I didn't go anywhere alone for months, not even the store down the street. Every car that slowed near me, every glance from a stranger made my heart race. What disturbed me most wasn't just the near miss. It was how easy it had been. Broad daylight, public lot, witnesses, like they'd done it before, like they understood people. The way women second-guess themselves, the way politeness can trap you. I learned something that day. Not every horror comes at night. Not every monster hides. Some wait in plain sight, leaning on a car, eyes calm, asking for help. And sometimes all it takes to save yourself is one word. No. But the question that still haunts me, gnaws at the back of my skull, is this. How many people didn't say it? I came to Sycamore Ridge because I wanted quiet. After 33 years working as a corrections officer in the state prison, quiet felt like a luxury. I didn't need much, no big house, no fancy neighborhood. Just a porch where I could sit with my morning coffee and hear birds instead of keys rattling and steel doors slamming. I'd seen too many fights, too many bodies hanging from bedsheets, too much that clung to me when the lights went out. My pension cleared. I turned in my badge and told myself I'd find some forgotten corner of Missouri and let the noise fade. Sycamore Ridge looked like that corner. Barely 1,000 people, tucked off a 2-lane strip of asphalt that cut through endless soy fields. Getting there felt like driving backward in time. 30 years at least. The town had one gas station with 2 pumps, a squat diner where breakfast was an all-day affair, and a post office no bigger than a tool shed. The houses weren't suburban cutouts either. They were squat ranch-style places from the 60s, yards wide and driveways deep. I bought one at the end of Sycamore Lane. 3 bedrooms, 2 baths, yellow siding, a small deck that sagged a little in back. Needed paint, needed love, but the bones were solid. The realtor said the last owner had passed, that the place had been empty for a few years. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't press. Those first days I kept busy, unpacking boxes, making runs to the hardware shop for nails and paint, learning when trash day was. I nodded at neighbors but didn't linger. After decades of keeping my guard up, small talk felt unnatural. Still, folks seemed polite enough. Older mostly. No kids in sight. People waved, then went on about their business. On my 5th evening, the rhythm broke. Around 6:30, someone knocked on the door. A man stood there, early 50s, clean-shaven, his flannel tucked tight over a soft gut, clipboard in hand. Evening, he said with a smile. Name's Marvin. I'm with the neighborhood patrol. Welcome to the Ridge. Thanks, I said. Just moved in last week. Yep, saw the U-Haul. He nodded. Figured I'd stop by, let you know about our watch. Nothing official. Just us keeping an eye out. We take turns driving at night, making sure nothing funny's happening. Mostly quiet here, but better safe than sorry. I frowned. You actually get much trouble? Sometimes, he shrugged. Couple drifters sniffing around the abandoned places on the edge of town. Squatters, drug stuff here and there. But it's mostly just presence. People see headlights, they move on. I glanced at his clipboard. You need volunteers? Wouldn't hurt. 1 shift a week, midnight to 3. We'll give you a vest and a map. Stay in the car, observe, report. That's it. I thought about it. Retirement left a lot of empty hours. All right, I said. I'll do it. Marvin grinned. Appreciate it, Jim. That's your name, right? I froze. I hadn't told him. Still, I nodded. Yeah, Jim. That Friday was my first patrol. I packed a red thermos of coffee, set an old rock playlist low, and traced the route Marvin gave me. 5 streets, tree-lined, mostly residential. I kept the car crawling, headlights dimmed. A few porch lights burned. A man in a robe fetched his paper. Someone else walked a dog, gave me a casual wave. It felt steady, even comforting. Like watching over a place untouched by the chaos I'd left behind. Weeks passed. Same quiet routine. Once a month we'd meet at the community center. Plastic chairs, burnt coffee. Marvin always ran the meeting. Carol, sharp-eyed, took attendance like a school teacher. Earl, tall and rigid, rarely spoke but watched everyone like a hawk. The message never changed. Stay in the car. Don't intervene. Eyes and ears, not hands. It all seemed harmless, ordinary. Until late October. A Wednesday night cold enough that frost filmed my windshield. I scraped it clear, climbed behind the wheel, and started my loop. That was the night everything shifted. At about 2:05 a.m., I was driving down Brook Hollow, one of the furthest streets in my assigned loop. Trees swallowed most of the view. Houses sat several yards back with long driveways and unkept lawns. A handful of the properties looked abandoned. Mailboxes split, porches sagging, grass grown high. I remember thinking how quiet it was until I saw 2 figures moving near a small gray house, whose paint had peeled away and whose blinds hung crooked. One man crouched at the side door, working at the frame with something long and metallic, likely a crowbar. He worked with the steady, deliberate motion of someone used to the task. The other man slipped out from behind the house, glanced around, and disappeared through the opening without hurry. They weren't masked. They moved like people certain no one watched. My stomach dropped. I eased my car to the shoulder and reached for my phone. Before my thumb could punch in the passcode, headlights flooded the rear view. A black pickup had crawled up behind me without a sound. It stopped almost on my bumper, and 3 men climbed out. One shined a light, another carried something heavy. The third walked slow, all of them casual in a way that felt practiced and dangerous. They approached my vehicle without urgency. The tallest tapped my driver's side window. I didn't roll it down. I didn't look them in the face. My hands stayed on the wheel and I kept my posture small, the way I'd been trained in situations where movement can be read. I slammed the car into drive and pulled off fast. A sharp crack in the back window spidered behind me. I didn't stop. I kept my foot down until I hit Main Street and other cars came between us. No chase. At the next light, I checked the mirror and the truck was gone. My heart hammered and my hand traced the crack in the glass. What chilled me more than the hole was the man I'd seen standing by the pickup under the street lamp, perfectly visible as if posing for me. No mask, no attempt to conceal himself. It was Marvin. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my kitchen with the lights off until the sun lifted. At 9, I called the sheriff's office. The dispatcher sounded distracted and said a deputy would try to stop by during the day. Around 11, a deputy in his early 30s arrived. Neat uniform, polite tone. I told him what I'd seen. The forced entry on the house, the 2 men, the truck that pulled up behind me, the crack in my window. I left Marvin's name out at first. I wanted the facts to stand on their own. The deputy listened and then said flatly, "That house has been empty a while. Could be owners or somebody checking it." I argued that it was 2 in the morning and they forced the door. He shrugged and tapped at his notepad. "We get calls like that. If no one reports property missing, it's hard to call it burglary. I'll file a report and we'll swing by if there's time." He added when I mentioned the neighborhood watch that Marvin was a good man who'd been around a long time. I didn't press. After that, the town changed toward me. Carol stopped answering texts. Earl, who always sat near the back at meetings and watched the room, refused to meet my eyes at the diner. No more requests to patrol. The monthly invites stopped. It felt as if I'd been quietly erased from the social ledger. Marvin walked past my place several times the next week, whistling, tipping his hat once in my direction. I didn't respond. I saw the black truck parked 2 streets over some afternoons, idling without a driver, and gone when I returned. Doug, who lived next door, started mowing his lawn later in the evening. Not late enough to break ordinance, but late enough to send a message. I bolted the deadbolt, bought new locks, closed the blinds, and set up a porch camera. The camera feed kept cutting out at odd times. The sheriff's office promised follow-ups that never happened. One morning, someone shoved a dead squirrel into my mailbox. No note, just fur and dried blood. Another night, I woke to gravel under tires and peered through the curtains. to see 3 silhouettes standing at the end of my driveway. They didn't come close. They lingered, then walked away. I can't prove what Sycamore Ridge has become. Maybe petty thieves, maybe a ring of people stealing from empty houses or something organized. What I learned is how they operate. The neighborhood watch provided cover. They drove the blocks in reflective vests, noted who was away, which houses had alarms or cameras, which ones were vulnerable. When they found a target, they took what they wanted. The town shrugged. The sheriff shrugged. It felt like a network built on mutual silence. I still haven't left. I should have gone, but packing up felt like admitting defeat and giving them the map of my life. Maybe they'd follow me, maybe they'd find me somewhere else. I sleep with the lights off now because bright rooms make shadows easier to read from outside. I keep a thin slit in the blinds and watch. When the truck comes by or a familiar figure pauses under the lamp, I count license plates and faces. It's small comfort, but it's something. I've started to learn their habits and the times. For now I watch, jotting down times and faces, keeping my own quiet ledger against whatever comes next every night. I was 10 when it happened, 1997, though the year barely mattered to a 10-year-old. My name is Colin. I grew up in Maple Springs, a tucked-away slice of suburbia in southern Illinois. It was the kind of town where the local paper celebrated the fall parade and high school football scores with the same earnestness. No chain stores existed then. We had Joe's Grocery, Bailey's Diner, and a gas station with a hand-cranked pump you had to flip on yourself. My father worked for the electric co-op, and my mother was a school secretary. People waved to one another. Front doors stayed unlocked. If someone's dog ran loose, neighbors joined the hunt. We weren't special, just predictable. And that predictability is what made what happened feel impossible. It began with the house next door. The Hoffmans moved in during the spring of '95. Carol and Dennis, mid-40s, no kids. Just an older beagle named Buster, who seemed to know every inch of his new yard the first week he arrived. My mother took over banana bread the week they moved in. I remember Carol on the porch in denim overalls and a white tee, one hand on the rail looking like she had to remind herself how kindness worked. Dennis kept to himself. His voice was rough from cigarettes and he had a way of inhaling a cigarette as if it gave him rhythm. He worked nights, maintenance or shipping, my dad guessed, and he nodded politely when he passed, not talkative, just present. Carol, on the other hand, tended her garden like it was a religion, hung laundry with my mom and bent to gossip over the fence and would slip me peppermints if I accidentally brought her mail. They were pleasant, but they kept to themselves. No barbecues, no church socials, nothing that pulled them into town life. At 10, I thought people were simply different. There was a curtain around them, a private space they kept closed, and I accepted it. Until one day the curtain vanished, and with it, the people. It was early October when the first wrongness crept in. The leaves had started that saturated red-orange that set every yard glowing. I was outside tossing a football with my friend Lucas when I realized Buster hadn't barked for days. Buster barked at mail carriers, at the neighbor's cat, at the wind. Silence filled the space he should have occupied. That night, while Mom stirred chili on the stove and the smell flattened the kitchen into a familiar comfort, I asked, "Have you seen Mrs. Hoffman lately?" She paused, spatula in hand. "Now that you mention it, no, not in a few days." The next morning, my dad walked the short path to their driveway and frowned at the dull blue Ford Taurus parked there. Unchanged, like the house had paused mid-breath. By day 3, Mom called, no answer. Day 4, she knocked, waited with the rhythm of someone who assumes interruption. Nothing. Day 5, worried. She called the police. I remember the officers moving through the yard with an odd, practiced gentleness. They knocked, listened, peered at curtains. When they forced the back door, the house smelled of dust and stale coffee, like any old house left idle for too long. They found Buster curled under a table, a fragile shape damp with his own mess, eyes wide and small. He was thin, trembling, the kind of fear you could see under fur. They carried him out wrapped in a blanket and offered him water on the lawn, while someone called animal control. Then the house itself did something stranger. Doors locked from inside, no sign of struggle, no blood, no luggage, no hastily scribbled notes. The Hoffmans, just gone, as if someone had closed the book in the middle of a sentence. Word moved through Maple Springs the way cold moves along a bare arm. In school, my teacher murmured in the hallway and tried to keep her voice level. My parents stopped letting me play after dark. For the first time, our front door was locked at night. Neighbors offered ordinary explanations because ordinary things are easier to hold. Maybe they left in the night, one suggested. But the car was there, another replied. People don't just vanish, someone said, and the whisper always dropped a little when they said vanish, as if the word itself had weight. Rumors sprang up to fill the space the Hoffmans left. An Indiana brother to explain a sudden leaving, gambling debts to explain desperation, hushed accusations of domestic violence traded in clipped sentences. Each theory bent toward some explanation that allowed us to sleep. The wildest came from Lucas. "They're spies," he said, solemn. "Taken, like in movies." His voice made the playground hush. Nights afterward, I lay awake listening for Buster's bark and felt our house breathe oddly, smaller somehow, as if whatever left had taken a piece of ordinary with it, and we kept pretending otherwise. Even at 10, I didn't buy the tidy explanations people offered. But the truth was, no one knew anything. The Hoffman house sat empty for years. Nobody moved in. The grass overtook the yard. Weeds cracked the driveway. Windows darkened and dust gathered in corners. Sometimes the police would come back, a tip, a neighbor calling, a routine check. But nothing ever changed. Buster ended up with the Walsh family down on the corner. He was old, slow-moving, but still friendly, and sometimes he wandered over to our yard as if the years hadn't shifted anything. But everything had shifted. I didn't feel safe anymore. The town didn't feel real. My parents stopped waving at neighbors or chatting across fences. Windows stayed closed at night. I wasn't allowed to walk to the corner store alone. Fear, subtle and persistent, crept into every corner of our lives. I left Maple Springs when I turned 18. College, then work, then marriage. Each year, I visited my parents in that same house, and each year I glanced at the empty shell next door, stomach twisting. The siding sagged, the shutters drooped, grass sprouted through the driveway cracks. Worse than all of that was the silence, heavy and absolute. One summer when I was 27, I drank too much with old friends, Lucas among them. "You still think about the Hoffmans?" I asked, slurring slightly. Lucas went quiet, his smile fading like a sunset. "Yeah," he said finally. "Sometimes I drive by just to see if anything's changed. But it never does." The silence seemed to hum between us like static. Then, 2 winters ago, everything shook again. My father called around 9:30 p.m., voice tight. "They're digging in the Hoffmans' yard," he said. "What?" I muttered, unable to process. Police. Flashing lights everywhere. Cadaver dogs. I drove down that weekend. The yard was roped off. Neighbors clustered in tight groups, whispering, watching. The officers said it was an ongoing investigation. Rumors spread fast. Someone had come forward. A man, once a co-worker of Dennis, claimed he'd known something but had been too scared to speak for years. They found something, but no one was told exactly what. Whispers suggested bone fragments buried under what had been a compost heap. Nothing confirmed, no arrests. Yet the air shifted. People began talking again, cautiously, nervously, as if the silence itself had been broken. The truth is, we may never know what happened to Carol and Dennis Hoffman. Maybe Dennis killed her and ran. Maybe someone else did. Maybe they were taken. Maybe it was something darker. Something buried under years of quiet suburban normality. But their disappearance ripped a hole through the town, through me. It was the first time I realized the world wasn't fair, that not everything has answers, that sometimes people vanish and nothing ever brings them back. That fear doesn't fade. Not when I lock my doors at night. Not when I pass a quiet house with blinds always closed. Not when I hear a dog bark, then silence. A few months ago, my parents sold their house, downsized to Springfield. Before leaving, I stood on their old porch one last time, staring at the Hoffman house. Still empty, still peeling, still haunted by a silence that could almost be touched. But behind it, a patch of earth had been dug and recovered, marked only by fresh grass. For a fleeting moment, I thought I saw Buster's tail flick in the corner of my vision. Then the wind moved the branches and the illusion vanished. I left, but I'll never stop wondering. In towns like Maple Springs, where nothing ever happens, when something finally does, it never truly goes away. I was born in a nowhere town called Iron Hill, tucked down in the southeast corner of Nebraska. where the corn grows taller than most of the people, and everybody knows everyone, or at least thinks they do. 18 years I spent there, and in all that time, only 2 things ever happened that truly rattled the place. The first was me being born, obviously. You're welcome. The second, well, that was the kind of tragedy nobody puts in the papers because small towns don't just bury their dead, they bury their monsters right alongside them. And if that sounds dramatic, just wait. This isn't a ghost story. Nothing crawled out of the woods. It's about what happens when a quiet little town raises something it doesn't even notice until it's already too late. It was fall, my freshman year of high school. I remember because Halloween decorations were up in windows, but no one had pulled their coats out yet. Sundays in Iron Hill were slow and hollow. After church and the big family dinners, the whole town seemed to sigh and go quiet. You could walk Main Street and not see a single car. My friends and I used to ride our bikes around after dinner, catching the last scraps of sunlight. That Sunday, it was me, Nathan, Troy, and Emily. We were coasting down Saddlehorn Avenue, laughing about nothing, when Ryan Carson came tearing down the hill on his bike like the devil himself was on his back. "Yo, guys, the Holloway's garage is on fire," he shouted, his face blotchy red from the ride. That was all it took. We pedaled after him, cutting corners so sharp our tires squealed. Smoke was already rising above the roofs, curling black and mean against the sky like a tornado made of ash. When we got there, the whole backyard was glowing orange, the garage swallowed by fire. Heat hit us from half a block away. Cops were shoving neighbors back, voices raised. Firefighters wrestled with hoses, shouting orders over the roar. We barely caught a glimpse before a cop snapped, "Back up!" Everybody back. Then came the noises, pops at first like fireworks, then sharp cracks. Bang! Bang, bang! The firefighters froze, then dropped everything and bolted. These were grown men, steady and unflappable, sprinting away like terrified kids. I'll never forget that, the look on their faces when training didn't mean a damn thing. We didn't stick around. We tore off on our bikes, suddenly too slow, legs burning, hearts thudding. I glanced back once, just once, and the fire had turned the whole sky a sick pink. By the next morning, the whole town was buzzing. Someone swore there'd been a person inside. "Kevin Holloway didn't show up to school?" I heard whispered. No, not him. It was his uncle or something. The Holloways were a big family. 2 brothers, a little sister, grandparents all under one roof. Nobody could say for sure who it was. We found out Tuesday. They herded us into the gym, every last student. You could tell it was serious. Mr. Hoffman, the principal, looked pale, and even Coach Garber wasn't chewing gum for once. Sheriff Mallory stood at the front with 2 deputies, his hat in his hands. The room went dead quiet as he stepped forward. "Folks," he began, voice steady but worn thin, "I know you've all heard about the fire at the Holloway property Sunday night. I'm sorry to tell you this way, but we lost one of our own." He paused, letting it hang heavy in the rafters. It was Kevin. It felt like all the oxygen got sucked out of the gym. Girls gasped. A few guys just stared at the floor like they hadn't heard right. "Right now," the sheriff went on, "we're trying to understand what happened. If any of you knew Kevin, if you noticed anything unusual about him lately, please come talk to us. Not here, not now, but call. Reach out." That was when the air shifted. Not grief, at least not yet. Confusion. Why were the cops asking about Kevin like that? He died in a fire. Wasn't that the end of it? Apparently not. By Wednesday, the rumors were crawling everywhere. One kid swore Kevin had been making fireworks and blew himself up. Another said his older brother was mixed up in drugs and the fire was tied to that. Nobody knew the truth. Not until Thursday night. That's when Iron Hill called one of its famous town meetings. You know the kind of meeting I mean. Folding chairs lined up in the rec center. Pitchers of lemonade sweating on plastic tables. Neighbors whispering into each other's shoulders as they filed in, pretending they didn't already know why they were there. I wasn't invited. My parents went. I was supposed to stay home, finish my algebra homework, and take the trash out. I did neither. Instead, I sat cross-legged on the floor in front of the TV playing GoldenEye, trying not to think about the fire. When the garage door finally rumbled open, I paused the game. The way they came in, I knew something was wrong before they said a word. My dad looked the same way he had the night my uncle died in that wreck. Jaw set so tight the muscle twitched in his cheek. My mom sat down on the couch like someone had knocked the air out of her. "Sit," Dad said, his voice low. My stomach flipped. Did I do something? He shook his head. This is about Kevin. And then they told me. Kevin hadn't just lit his garage on fire. He'd been building something, a bomb. He'd pieced it together using instructions he'd found online. Sitting out there in that cluttered garage, screwing parts together like it was a shop project. Only it wasn't. The thing went off while he was assembling it. The garage didn't just burn, it exploded. The rest of the house caught fire from the blast. His little brother had been inside, watching TV. He lived only because the living room was on the opposite side of the house. And then came the part that stuck in my throat for days. They'd found a spiral notebook, half charred under the splintered mess of his workbench. Inside, he'd written it all down, his plan. He wanted to build a working bomb and plant it under St. Lucas Church on Veterans Day. The church would have been packed, over 100 people, nearly the whole town. He wasn't aiming at anyone in particular. He just wanted to hurt, to destroy. My mom started crying again right there, head in her hands. My dad just stared at the wall like the words were still echoing off it. He would have done it, he muttered. He really would have. Here's the part that never made sense to me. Kevin wasn't some outcast. He wasn't a loner scribbling in notebooks, skulking down hallways. He was quiet, sure, but not strange. He wasn't bullied. He didn't fight. He sat in the second row of Spanish class, sometimes laughed at dumb jokes. I didn't like him much, but I didn't hate him either. He was just there. So when people started saying, he always seemed a little off, or I guess he never smiled enough, I didn't buy it. That was just folks trying to make a neat shape out of something that never fits. The cops never released the whole journal, but somebody leaked pieces. Enough. He'd written about Columbine. Said he understood those guys. Said he wanted to be remembered. Some nights, even now, I lie awake wondering, what if the fuse hadn't blown early? What if it had gone exactly the way he planned? Would I even be here to wonder? Would any of us? The Holloways left town 6 weeks later. Their house was bulldozed by spring. In its place, the city built a park, Holloway Field. Nobody says the name out loud anymore. The school brought in a counselor every week for 2 months. She sat in an empty classroom waiting. Nobody went. A few kids tried making edgy jokes about Kevin, until Troy broke a kid's nose in the lunchroom for saying, "Guess Holloway got his wish." No one pressed charges. It's been 19 years now. I live in Denver. Iron Hill's still there, still quiet. Still the kind of place where folks wave from porches and the diner serves cinnamon rolls bigger than your hand. But every Veterans Day I remember. I remember the garage burning like the mouth of hell had opened in the middle of town. I remember the sound of firefighters running instead of fighting. I remember the exact moment I realized a kid from my Spanish class had tried to kill everyone I knew, and that the only reason he failed was dumb, blind luck. Sometimes horror isn't what you see. Sometimes it's what almost happens. And in Iron Hill, Nebraska, the worst thing that ever happened was the thing that didn't. I was 17 when we left everything behind. My cousin Molly and I had barely finished high school, our diplomas still warm from the printer, when we were shoved into the back of my uncle's beat-up Chevy. The seats smelled faintly of oil and sun-baked vinyl, and as the engine groaned down the highway, we watched our hometown skyline shrink until it looked like nothing more than a smudge of gray against the horizon. We weren't escaping trouble. We were chasing possibility, something bigger than the lives we'd known. It all started when my youngest aunt, Charlotte, married a man who ran a dairy farm out in a speck-on-the-map place called Fairhill, Texas. He said he needed help with the work, just a few extra hands. Somehow, that modest request snowballed into our entire clan loading up trucks and trailers, like some kind of wandering caravan. Grandparents, cousins, aunts, uncles. Dozens of us leaving roots behind and pretending new ones could be planted in foreign soil. Fairhill was quiet in a way that pressed against your ears. Stop signs outnumbered stoplights, and everyone you passed would wave, whether they knew your name or just guessed they'd learn it by Sunday service. The land was cracked and dry, but the air smelled of sun-warmed hay and dark soil. When the wind carried right, you'd hear cows lowing across the distance, drawn out and sleepy like a lullaby from the earth itself. My dad, Daniel, fit there better than the rest of us. He'd been a farmer his whole life. His hands toughened to leather, fingernails lined with soil that no amount of scrubbing could erase. His skin was baked by decades of sun, the creases in his face carved deep and permanent. In Farrell, he didn't just blend in. He belonged, and nobody seemed to match him more naturally than Rocky Thompson. Rocky was in his 50s, but he moved with the strength and quickness of a man decades younger. Every day he wore the same threadbare overalls, always with one strap undone, a grease-stained cap fused to his head, and boots so worn they looked like they'd seen the Dust Bowl firsthand. Yet despite their condition, he'd still outrun you across a cornfield if you were foolish enough to bet against him. He didn't waste words, but when he spoke, people leaned in, and he had a knack for showing up exactly when you needed him most. 4 a.m. with tools for a busted tractor, or sitting at your dinner table later that same day with a store-bought pie he claimed he'd baked himself. Folks in Farrell either liked him, owed him, or both. My dad loved him like kin. Their friendship formed quick, first through long shifts at the dairy, then later after it closed when they built something of their own. Thompson and Rayner Gameworks. In a town where deer season was practically religion, their business thrived. They spent hours side by side in fields leaning against the tailgate of a rusted truck, trading sips from a thermos of bitter black coffee. I'd see them laughing at something too quiet for me to catch. Their bond strong in that wordless way men sometimes have when they understand each other better than anyone else ever could. And then, one Tuesday, everything broke. Angela, my stepmom, worked as an EMT, and every week she'd stop by Rocky's place to sort his pills. He'd had a scare years back, a heart flutter or two, but he'd always brushed it off with a shrug and a joke about being too stubborn to die. That afternoon, Angela let herself in, like always. The kitchen smelled faintly of bacon grease and dust. Rocky was on the floor, curled against the linoleum, his hand clawed at his chest. Angela dropped beside him instantly. She told us later how she counted compressions out loud, how the radio crackled as she called for backup, how she pressed air into his lungs until her arms shook. But Rocky didn't come back. By the time help arrived, it was too late. The funeral was suffocating. They held it at Farrell Baptist, the only building wide enough to swallow the crowd. Heat clung to every corner, mixing with grief so thick it felt like you could taste it. Friends came from everywhere. High school teammates gone gray, old hunting partners in pressed shirts, church families, farmers from miles around. I remember staring at my dad in the front pew. His shoulders were squared, his face carved into stone, but his hands betrayed him. Clenched so tight in his lap, the knuckles blanched white. For the first time, I realized how much a man could break without ever making a sound. I'd never seen him cry, not even at Grandma's funeral. But when they lifted Rocky's coffin out into that blistering sun, something in Dad snapped. Tears tracked down his cheeks without sound, and for a breath he looked decades older, as if the years had finally caught up with him all at once. After that, everything started to unravel. Strange relatives we'd never heard of drifted in. Faces showing up on porches asking about land deeds, tractors, and money. Conversations that used to be small and private turned into shouting matches. Legal notices arrived in the mail. People who had smiled at the diner now avoided eye contact. The game processing work slowed to a crawl. Shipments stopped coming in. Customers found other things. Dad tried to hold it all together like he always did, but you could see the weight carving deeper lines into his face. He moved slower. Mornings came hesitantly. Laughter, the easy, necessary kind, disappeared from the house. About 6 weeks after the funeral, I had a dream that didn't feel like one. It didn't place me inside my body the way dreams usually do. I was an observer instead, watching a scene that was more real than waking life. There was a wide field of wheat, gold and endless, under a sky so clean and painfully blue it seemed photographic. The kind of landscape you only see in old calendars or in childhood memory. Rocky stood there, but younger, maybe 30, not the older, worn man I'd known. His hair was blonde and thick in the sunlight, no cap, no grease. His shirt was clean and buttoned to the throat, tucked into neat jeans. Even his boots looked new. He leaned on a freshly built fence post, one hand resting on the wood like he'd just set it in place. The wind moved everything but made no sound. Still, I heard him, not with my ears exactly, but with some part of me that knows things without words. "I'm okay," he said, and his voice was calm. "I made it. I'm home." He smiled toward the long field and then dissolved into the air like smoke thinning and drifting away. I woke up with the pillow damp on my cheek and a strange, quiet peace sitting in my chest. I didn't tell anyone then. I guess I wanted to hold it private, a small miracle I could carry alone. A year passed. We sat under the old pecan tree behind Dad's place, lazily watching the dusk spread purple across the fields while cicadas screamed the same frantic song they'd been singing since before I was born. We traded the same stories, all of them leaning back toward Rocky. Old pranks, the way he fixed a busted gate, the thermos he always left with a faint ring of coffee on the lid. The air smelled of crushed grass and cooling earth. Something in me felt it was time to say it aloud, so I told Dad every detail. The blue sky, the new boots, the way Rocky said he'd made it home. He listened without interrupting, staring out at the fields like he was trying to pin the picture in his mind. When I finished, he didn't say much at first. Then he blinked like a man surfacing and said slowly, "I never had a dream like that." His voice was small. He wiped at his eyes with a thumb that trembled. The way he always knew what I needed before I could say it. I don't claim to understand ghosts or signs or any of that. I've never been one for omens. But that night I felt sure of one thing. It wasn't meant to scare me or to start something twisted and terrible. It felt like a closure so neat and final. A goodbye. Years rolled on. Dad went back to the land. He works slower now, his movements deliberate, but steady in a way that's comforting. The game plant eventually folded. Small towns change and people move on, but he says he prefers the slower pace. He kept Rocky's old cap and hooked it over the corner of the shop doorway. It's faded and frayed and carries a smell like sun-baked denim and worn leather. Sometimes, when the wheat is tall and the breeze comes just right, I swear that scent comes off it. Not the sharp soap smell of the town, but something softer and dustier, like overalls left out on a fence post to dry. Rocky never came back to us in any other dreams. It was only that one time, and it was enough. Now when Dad and I talk about him, there's a sadness, sure, but there's also something gentler. A peace you can feel settle over you like a blanket. Not everything that's broken can be repaired. Some things need to be set down and left alone. In a small town with silent fields and endless wheat, that's often the kind of repair that matters. It's enough. It's home. I had never lived in the countryside before the fall I turned 16. Until then, I was a city kid through and through. Crowded sidewalks, apartment buildings stacked like concrete bookshelves. The restless hum of traffic that seeped into your bones because it never stopped. But after a string of burglaries near our apartment, and a break-in at the store my dad managed, my parents decided they'd had enough. They sold what little we owned, packed everything into the back of a rented U-Haul and hauled us north to Iron Creek, a speck of a town in southern Montana that barely showed up on a map. To me, it felt like the end of the world. Population, maybe 10,000 if you counted the farms scattered along the outskirts. One grocery store, one gas station, one school that combined grades 7 through 12. Our house was a squat one-story near the town center, modest and quiet. You could walk the entire town in under 30 minutes. Everyone knew everyone, which meant everyone noticed when someone new showed up. And me? I stood out, quiet, awkward, a city transplant who didn't know where to put her hands. Within a week, I was enrolled at Iron Creek High. My first day was worse than the usual new kid jitters. Mrs. Platt, my homeroom teacher, an older woman with the exhausting cheerfulness of a church volunteer, made me stand in front of the class and introduce myself. I could feel the weight of every eye pressing into me. "I'm Ivy," I said, voice small. "We just moved here from Denver." That was all I managed before my throat closed. A few whispers rippled through the room. Someone giggled, just a thoughtless laugh, like I was a puppy doing a trick, but it cut deep. By lunch, I was hunched at the corner table near the vending machines, pretending to scroll through fake messages on my phone. That became my routine for weeks. I tried saying hi to a couple of girls once, but they always turned inward, their circle snapping shut before I'd finished a sentence. I wore the wrong shoes, spoke the wrong slang, missed every inside joke. Eventually, I stopped trying. That's when I met Logan. It was in fourth period art, a class I'd picked just to fill my schedule. I wasn't good at drawing, but it beat gym. Logan sat 2 seats away, always bent over this battered sketch pad that looked like it had survived a flood or a fire. He barely spoke, not to the teacher, not to anyone. He just drew. One afternoon, I caught myself glancing at his work. He noticed, then wordlessly turned the page so I could see. A tree stretched across the paper, but twisted wrong. Hidden faces peered out of the bark, dozens of them, their expressions half screams. Shadowy figures melted into the background like ghosts imprisoned in the wood. "That's really good," I blurted before I could stop myself. He looked up. His eyes were a strange shade of gray, like smoke curling in the air. "Thanks. Most people just think it's creepy. I mean, it is, but in a good way." He smiled, faint but real. "You're not from here, are you?" "Nope, Denver, big change." "Yeah, I don't really fit in either." "I get it." And that was how it started. At first just small comments during class. Then he began sitting with me at lunch. He introduced me to his only two friends, Tyler and Reed, both older, both into heavy metal and obscure indie films I'd never heard of. I didn't connect with them, not really, but they didn't mind me sitting there. That alone felt like something. Logan, though, was different. He carried himself with a calmness that made him seem older, or maybe just separate. Like he was tuned to a frequency the rest of us couldn't hear. I felt safer around him than anyone else at that school, which is probably why I said yes when he invited me to his house one Friday. We were sitting in the courtyard after lunch when he asked, flicking a pebble between his fingers, "My parents are out this weekend. You should come by. I've got a bunch of old horror movies, stuff you can't stream." I hesitated. "Where do you live?" "Just outside town. 40 minutes, give or take. Real quiet. Farm road." It sounded isolating, but no one else had invited me to anything since we'd moved. I was tired of being invisible. "Okay," I said. "That could be fun." He smiled. "Cool. I'll pick you up after school." That night I told my mom it was just a movie night with a new friend and that his parents would be home. A lie, but if I'd told her the truth, she would have said no. She agreed reluctantly, reminding me to call if I needed anything. I didn't mention that there probably wouldn't be reception out there. Logan's truck looked like it had rolled straight out of a 90s movie. An old blue Chevy, rust gnawing at the edges. We drove until the neat little streets dissolved into open fields and dust roads. 10 minutes out, my phone lost signal. "Just so you know," Logan said, casual, "we're off-grid out here. No neighbors, no towers, no drama." "Great," I joked, though it came out shaky. "Sounds like horror movie 101. He smirked. "Yeah, but you've got me. I'm the harmless type." I smiled back, but the way he said it lingered in my head, unsettled, like a line from a script I hadn't read the ending to. His house sat low to the ground, a faded ranch-style place buried in tall grass and abandoned farming equipment. It looked like nobody had touched it since the 80s. Peeling paint, a sagging porch, rusted tools against the shed. 3 other vehicles slouched along the gravel drive. None looked like they'd start. Inside, rooms felt tidy. Dark wood furniture, worn but orderly. No pets, no signs of other people. "Where are your parents again?" I asked, trailing him into the living room. "Out in Spokane visiting my aunt," Logan said. "My brother was supposed to come, but he bailed." "You live out here year-round?" "Yeah, Dad's a welder. Mom works in town. I like the quiet." We watched a grainy slasher flick and made small talk between scenes. School, music, nothing heavy. As dusk fell, unease grew. Little things snagged at me. Logan glancing at his phone despite no signal. The way he closed every curtain at once. The click of the deadbolt when there was no one to keep out. He said he needed the bathroom and left. I sat too long, stomach tight. Curiosity got the better of me and I wandered down the hall. The first bedroom matched his sketchy persona. An unmade bed, posters, scattered sketchbooks. I opened a dresser drawer. The third drawer down held a handgun. Real, heavy, not a toy. I slid it closed, heart thudding. A floorboard creaked. I turned, expecting him. The door at the hall's end was ajar. I walked toward it because I couldn't not. When I pushed it open, a smell hit me like raw meat left to rot. Then the legs. A man's body lay face down on the carpet, half covered by a blanket. A dark patch soaked the fibers near his head. A photo on the nightstand showed 2 boys, one clearly Logan, the other older. That had to be his brother. I froze. No scream, nothing. I just stood there until Logan's voice came from behind me. "You weren't supposed to go in there." He stood at the end of the hall, chest heaving, eyes wide. Sadness and anger flickered across his face. "I didn't want you to see that," he said. "What happened?" I whispered. "He came home drunk." Started yelling again. His jaw worked. I snapped. "You have to take me home," I said, backing away. "Now," he shook his head. "I can't." "Logan, I need time to—" "If you leave, you'll tell someone," he said. "I know you will." "I won't, I swear," I lied, saying it felt softer than the thought of police or questions. He looked at me, searching, then away. "I don't want to hurt you." "Then don't. Please, let me go." My feet wouldn't move. For a beat, he didn't move either. Then I ran. I bolted through the living room, flung the front door open, and spilled into the night. I didn't hear him behind me, but I didn't wait to check. I ran down the gravel drive until my lungs burned and the dark thinned at the edges. I finally stopped and checked my phone. One bar, I called my mom. She answered on the third ring. Her voice went tight with fear when I started crying. I gave what landmarks I could. 20 minutes later, headlights cut through the night and relief hit me so hard I doubled over. At first, I told my mom only that I felt unsafe. The police came. Logan was arrested that night without resisting. They found his brother's body and the gun. Later, evidence files held drawings, many of them, disturbing scenes that matched what I'd found. Names had been scrawled under some. One had my name. I never went back to Iron Creek High. We moved again, quietly, without saying goodbye. Afterwards, going through it all felt unreal. Officers repeated questions until my voice thinned. They documented facts with professional distance. At the station, an investigator opened one of Logan's sketchbooks on the table. Page after page held charcoal trees and faces folded into bark, tiny annotations in cramped handwriting. Seeing my name beneath one image made my stomach drop. I kept replaying the house, the smell, the photo, Logan's expression, searching for a moment I could have changed that would have stopped it before anything else happened. I still wonder what small sign I missed. I never planned to work at a mortuary. That wasn't anywhere on my map. But plans fray when everything else does. 3 years ago, I drove north and parked what was left of my life in Wexler Ridge, a slow town in northern Missouri where most folks are farmers, truckers, or retirees, the kind of place where strangers tip their hat. I didn't know anyone, and that was the point. My name's Nate Carver. I came to disappear, to leave St. Louis's noise and the memory of the crash that took my fiancée. She was driving. I was in the passenger seat. I lived. She didn't. You can't bury someone you loved and not feel like a piece of yourself is shoveled after them. A family friend pulled a favor and I landed the night attendant slot at Hollowbrook Mortuary. It was slow, practical work. Paperwork, intake logs, basic prep, and keeping the cooler running. Mr. Landry, the owner, was polite in the old man way and kind but distant, and he left me to my shifts. The first 6 months were hollow and ordinary. Fluorescent lights, the hum of the cooler, my footsteps in a building that smelled faintly of disinfectant. Then, one October night last year, I swung the cooler door open at the start of shift and saw myself on the shelf. At first I laughed, wrong and short, chalked it up to exhaustion. This wasn't some look-alike. It was my face, the faint scar on my right brow, the chipped front tooth from junior high, the freckle on my collarbone my fiancée used to kiss. A white morgue sheet covered the body. The toe tag was blank. I checked the intake log. Nothing new. The latest entry was 2 days old. I remember retreating, my knee striking the prep counter, a tray of tools clattering to the floor. I didn't call Landry. "Who do you call for this?" I muttered to the empty room. "Hey, Landry, there's a dead me in the cooler. Pop down when you can." Right. So I did what I knew. I processed the body. I shaved the face I'd seen in bed, washed the hands I used to hold hers, and wheeled it to the retort. My hands trembled while the heat turned it to ash. When I swept up the remains, I dumped them without a tag, without the usual sealed box. The idea of myself boxed felt obscene. I didn't sleep that morning. I told myself it had been a fugue, a grief dream, but the image stayed. The next night he was there again. Same vacant eyes, same blank tag, my face. At first it was every few days, then it was every night. Each time the skin shifted, sometimes the hair matched my college cut. Once a dark bruise appeared under an eye I hadn't had in years. I asked Landry about cameras. "No point," he said. "Old building, don't want the bill." He didn't ask questions. I started a journal. Dates, details, the way the corpse mouthed nothing. One night, the expression slipped into a smile that made the face familiar in a new, sick way. Once, and I swear this, it blinked. I tested it. I left the body on the prep table under the lamp. The next night, it was back in the cooler, arranged fresh. I made a shallow cut behind its ear with a scalpel, a tiny slit I could identify. The next morning, I found the same pale mark on my own skin. Not deep, just surface, like a memory I couldn't place. I called in sick one night and slept with every light on. I dreamed of someone knocking. When I woke, 2 sets of muddy prints trailed across my porch, though I hadn't left in days. Some nights I talked aloud to empty rooms. This isn't happening, I'd say, feeling foolish and sounding like a child. Once I confronted Landry on a slow afternoon. He gave me a long look and said, "Kid, people's grief shows up in strange places." His shrug was no comfort. I wanted someone to tell me it wasn't real, to tell me how to stop being haunted by myself. Instead, I learned rituals that kept panic from fracturing me. A year spun by. One long loop of cremate, clean, repeat. I stopped dating, stopped answering calls, stopped pretending I had a life outside the mortuary. I ate instant noodles in a small kitchen, watched shadows creep across the ceiling, and felt less like a man and more like a presence waiting for the next night shift, every single night. Over time, I fell into a groove. Unlock the back door, flip on the strip light, open the cooler, glance for him, ignore him if he was there, do the paperwork. If he was on the shelf, I cremated him alone. The motion so rote they felt like rites. Then one night I couldn't. I stood in the cold, stared at that body and my body, his body, whatever this thing wanted to be. And everything that had been tamped down for 3 years came loose. I slid to the tile and cried harder than I had at the funeral, the sound coming out wrong in a room built around silence. After a long time, I closed the cooler and left the door ajar. I walked out and let the night take it. I expected alarms, calls, maybe Landry marching down with questions. The next night, when I pushed the cooler, it was empty. For the first time since the first time, there was no twin on the shelf. I laughed then, a crazy, ridiculous laugh, and I danced in the prep room for a ridiculous 3 minutes because part of me wanted to believe the world had given me a reprieve. I was wrong. It started again, but different. I was brushing my teeth and rinsing in the yellowed bathroom mirror when I noticed a bruise on my jaw I didn't remember getting. Then the thin red line behind my ear showed up. The same place I'd nicked the corpse with a scalpel months before, only fresher, raised and tender. The next night at work, I threw open the cooler and there he was, but alive, chest barely moving, breath shallow, eyes open and staring past me like he could see a place I couldn't. He wasn't flopping or twitching like a body. He was waiting, wired to something I didn't understand. I slammed the door shut and ran out into the parking lot, not stopping until I was doubled over next to the dumpster, heaving. My hands smelled like disinfectant and fear. I didn't go back in that night. When I came the following evening, the cooler was empty again. 2 weeks later, in the kind of rain that rinses the world raw, there was a knock on my door. The porch light cast a pool around whoever was standing there. I peered through the peephole and nearly dropped the knob. He was soaked, jeans clinging to tired legs, wearing my hoodie with the bleach splash on the sleeve and those ripped pocket jeans I only wore on bad days. My heart felt like it wanted to climb out of my chest. I whispered into the phone, "Jesus, get away," and reached under the bed for the bat I'd kept since moving in. My hands were shaking so badly I dialed 911 with 3 wrong numbers before I got through. When I looked back, he was gone. The police found nothing. No footprints, no one on the camera, the officer told me like it was good news. The footage from the doorbell cam was just static and time code, as if the night had glitched out of being recorded. I finally went to Landry and said everything, because keeping it in my head felt like letting it grow roots. He listened without flinching, folding his hands until they were a map of veins and old scars. Then he walked to the embalming room, unlocked an upper drawer and pulled out a yellowed folder the size of a small brick. Photos spilled out, black and white, edges curled, and old ledger pages with cramped handwriting. He set them on the counter like he was laying down a truth. "You're not the first," he said. "It happened to my father, his father. Hollowbrook's been around since the 1890s. Every generation one of us gets it." "What is it?" I asked, voice tight as wire. "No name," he said. "No origin anyone could pin down. Just a pattern. It shows up as a reflection. At first dead, then alive, then it... He stopped, and in the silence his meaning sat heavy between us. It tries to take your place. Take your... what? How? My breath came shallow. It felt absurd to say the words aloud, but saying them made them real. It can't truly exist unless you let it, Landry said finally. Lowering his voice into something like counsel, he added, "Stop feeding it." So I tried. I stopped the cremations. I stopped putting names on it, stopped documenting, stopped touching it. When it was in the cooler, I turned my back. If I saw a shape in my window on the road, I refused to look. Once I walked past him at the mailbox like he'd been a stranger in a raincoat. Little by little, the marks on my skin faded. The bruise lightened. The cut behind my ear closed and became that pale line everyone has somewhere. For a few weeks, I felt like a man again, cautious but myself. Then last week, Landry was found at his desk, slumped forward. Heart failure, the coroner said. He'd been a steady thing in that building. When I unlocked the back door for my shift last night, the cooler was standing open like a mouth. Inside were 3 of him, 3 of me, arranged on the shelves, one sullen and sorrowful, one furious with a tightened jaw, and one grinning like a man who had just finished a long, satisfying joke. Their faces were the same features I'd been living in my whole life, but each looked like a different mood of the same person. I've locked the main door. I've unplugged the phone, ripped the line from the wall. I'm sitting at the stainless prep table with a pen that squeaks and a steno pad. The hum of the cooler a steady thing at the edge of hearing. Embalming fluid smells faintly medicinal. Fluorescent light paints everything with a sickly patience. I understand now what the old papers mean when they speak of replacement. This place doesn't let the space you leave go empty. It waits. If whoever reads this ever comes to Hollow Brook, don't believe the map if it tries to make you smaller. We're not offered second chances here. We are replaced. I thought I could fight it. I thought I could starve it into absence. But the smile on the third one, the one that isn't faking anything, looks too practiced, too comfortable. It knows the rhythms I learned. I don't think I'm the original anymore, and the cooler is calling. It was late September 1996 when everything shifted for me. I was 13, stuck in that restless age where you don't quite know what to do with yourself, living in a small town called Renford, clinging to the edge of the Midlands. Renford wasn't a village, not really a city either. It was one of those in-between places that time forgot. Rows of crumbling brick terraces, pubs boarded up with plywood, and the smell of damp forever trapped in the mortar. My mom and I had only been there a year. Dad had walked out on us, and Renford was what she could afford. She worked long hours at the textile warehouse on the edge of town, leaving me with empty afternoons and too much silence. Most days I wandered through the back streets, past moss-slicked walls and shuttered shops, searching for something, anything, that might cut through the monotony. Renford was the kind of place where people didn't really live so much as endure. They grew up, worked themselves down to the bone, and then disappeared without ceremony. The only real hub of life was the Rose Precinct, a concrete shopping block dropped in the 70s over the skeletons of old mills. It was ugly, bleak gray, corners sharp as knives, but it had what people needed: a bakery, a chemist, a discount shop. At the heart of it sat a sunken plaza, circular, surrounded by steep stone steps that funneled you down into it. The locals called it the Nest. No one really knew why. Some said it was because of the birds, flocks of them always circling overhead, roosting on the ledges, watching from every angle. That's where it happened. That's where I saw something that still won't leave me. It was a Saturday. Mom had just finished her shift. We didn't have much money, so weekends usually meant sharing a pastry from Penny's Bakehouse and a slow wander through the market stalls. That day was no different. We bought our usual cheese and onion slice and sat on the cold stone steps of the Nest, crumbs falling between us. The sky was thick with low cloud, that flat gray that makes the whole world feel like it's pressing down. Mom rubbed her ankles, grimacing. She always wore those beige tights that pinched at her skin, leaving deep red ridges around her legs. "Bloody boots have been pinching me all day," she muttered. "You should just get new ones," I said. She gave a half smile, tired. "With what money, sweetheart?" "Wish I could." We laughed lightly, one of those small, forced laughs, The kind you use to ignore how heavy everything really is. That's when we noticed him. He was stretched out on the pedestal in the center of the nest. A man everyone in Renford knew, even if they didn't know him, Polly. That's what people called him. No one knew if he had a home or where he went when night fell. He was always around, though, muttering at himself, rattling a paper cup, sometimes shouting at pigeons. He was part of the backdrop, as constant as the cracked paving stones. But that day he wasn't muttering. He wasn't moving at all. One arm was flopped over his chest, the other dangling off the side of the stone. His beard was wild, matted with crumbs and ash. His coat looked soaked through, even though it hadn't rained in days. Has he moved? Mom asked, squinting. I don't know. He's probably sleeping. Been there long? I think so. I saw him when we walked in. The air seemed to notice before the people did. Conversations around the plaza dropped to low murmurs, fragments carried on the wind. A few teenagers kept glancing at him, whispering. An old man with a cane veered wide, not daring to pass too close. Yet no one stepped forward. No one intervened. The birds did, though. The first magpie landed beside him, claws clicking on the stone. Then another fluttered down. A third perched on the fountain ledge, head jerking as it studied him. I thought nothing of it at first. Magpies were everywhere in Renford, black and white shadows darting across rooftops. 3 for a girl, Mom murmured absently. What? Magpies, she said. 1 for sorrow, 2 for joy, 3 for a girl, 4 for a boy. Don't you know the rhyme? I didn't answer. I was staring at the birds now, their quick, nervous movements. The way their glassy eyes locked onto Polly like he wasn't a man at all but discarded scraps. Then one hopped closer and pecked at his cheek. Did you see that? I whispered, my voice climbing. Mom squinted, frowning. Probably just picking at a scab. You know how filthy he always looked. Another sharp peck. Then another. More magpies swooped in, 5, 6, wings flapping, claws scraping. One struck hard enough that Polly's head jolted sideways. That's not right, Mom muttered under her breath. Her voice was low but tight, threaded with unease. That's not right at all. It's strange what makes you freeze. What keeps you sitting there, unable to move while the world begins to shift into something you don't recognize. We were surrounded by shoppers, families, kids running with sticky fingers and balloons. Yet not a single person stepped forward. It was as if something unseen had clamped around all our throats, whispering, "Wait, don't move." The spell shattered with a scream. A sharp, piercing cry when one magpie ripped a strip of flesh from Polly's cheek. Then chaos. Screams, shouts, voices overlapping. Someone bellowed for help. A man in a blue jumper rushed up the steps, froze at the top, then stumbled back down, gagging. Oh Jesus, oh Christ, he muttered like a broken record. But no matter how loud it got, I couldn't look away. My eyes locked on Polly as more birds descended. 10, maybe 15 of them. Wings thrashing, claws scraping stone. They moved with a terrible purpose, as if they'd been waiting years for this single moment. His face was no longer a face, just a ruined mass of red pulp, raw tissue dangling from his beard like rotten strings. His lips were gone. One eye had vanished entirely. He didn't flinch. Not once. I think he's dead, I whispered, throat tight. Mom looked sick, her skin gray under the plaza's flat light. Get up now, we're leaving. She pulled me by the arm and we bolted up the steps. My chest burned. Halfway to the street, I turned back. 2 boys had climbed over the stone edge, trying to scare the birds away with flailing arms. One slipped, nearly tumbling onto the pedestal. The other froze, staring down at what was left of Polly, unable to move. We didn't have mobile phones back then. No one did. Someone sprinted into the chemist, shouting at the cashier to call the police. Others scattered, searching for a copper. There were still a few on foot patrol in those days. A young officer arrived maybe 10 minutes later. He couldn't have been more than 20, his face still smooth, almost boyish. He took one look at the body, went pale green, and staggered to the nearest bin to vomit. Then he fumbled with his radio, voice cracking as he called it in. Soon more officers came. An ambulance. A coroner's van. They draped a tarp over what was left of Polly, but it didn't matter. Everyone had seen. Everyone already knew. Polly was dead and the birds had eaten him. Later, the questions came. The police tried to piece together the timeline. They figured Polly had been there since dawn, maybe longer. dead since the night before from exposure, a seizure, or a heart attack. His body had lain motionless for hours while hundreds of people walked past him like he was invisible. The magpies had been watching, waiting. Reports in the paper said carrion birds were drawn to chemical changes in the flesh, that decomposition sent signals. Others whispered darker things, that the magpies had known, that they'd seen weakness in him long before death came. Nobody really explained it. Nobody wanted to. There was no funeral, or if there was, none of us heard about it. The council scrubbed the plaza, washed the stone, painted over stains. For a few weeks there was a plaque with plastic flowers until someone vandalized it and the council took it down. The pedestal remained for a while, but no one sat there. Not ever again. Years slipped by. The moment I turned 18, I left Renford behind. Found a job in Nottingham, started a family, built a life where the nest couldn't follow me. I tried to bury it. But even now, whenever I hear wings flutter or catch a flash of black and white feathers at the edge of my vision, it comes back. I remember Polly's stillness. I remember the snapping sound of beaks against bone. I remember how we all watched, frozen, not because we didn't care, but because he smelled, because he was nothing to us, because we didn't want to get close. That's the true horror. I went back last year, nearly 3 decades later. The nest is still there, but the pedestal's gone, replaced by a plain slab of concrete. Yet perched along the edge were 4 magpies. They stared down at the plaza, feathers glossy in the gray light. One of them turned its head and fixed on me, unblinking, patient. And for the first time in 29 years, the thought pierced through. What if Polly wasn't dead when it started? What if he'd been paralyzed, trapped in his own body, feeling every stab, every rip as those sharp little beaks tore him apart? I'll never know. But I never sit on those steps anymore. And if you ever see a magpie land on someone you assume is sleeping, trust me, they're not asleep.